Tuesday, February 13th. The Red Army keeps up the offensive on the Finnish defensive line, and an airborne division parachutes into the rear. Marshal Mannerheim can only send 2 battalions of reinforcements, and the numerous Soviet tanks and artillery pieces open a 1-kilometer breach in the Finns' second line of defense. The crack Finnish Tavast regiment has been swept aside. The Soviets take advantage of the gap in the enemy lines to launch continuous assaults using tactics designed by Marshal Kliment Voroshilov. By nightfall, the Finnish government recognizes its forces have suffered a high number of casualties and lost some of their most advanced positions. Adolf Eichmann, head of the Department 4B4 of the Reich Main Security Office, orders the deportation of all German Jews from the city of Stettin to the Polish ghettos. At the same time, Hans Frank, the governor of occupied Poland, aware of the complaints being made by General Blaskowitz about the brutalities being committed by some army corps and the SS in the country, travels to Berlin to ask Hitler to remove the general from all his posts of responsibility. The sea war continues to claim innocent victims. U-25, commanded by Victor Schulze, sinks the Danish merchant ship Chastine Merk, and Harold Grossis's U-53 sinks the Swedish ship Norna. Wednesday, February 14th. The Finnish government appeals to the West, claiming that the Red Army is violating the Geneva Convention by bombing hospitals and residential areas. The British Admiralty suspects that the oil tanker Altmark, which serves as a refueling ship for the battleship Graf Spee, is transporting in its hold hundreds of British prisoners captured during actions carried out by the disappeared Kriegsmarine battleship. For some time, Churchill has been calling for the capture of this floating prison. During the months it has been hiding in the southern Atlantic. The ship's captain, Heinrich Dow, sets a course for Germany, but is spotted by British planes in Norwegian waters between Iceland and the Faroe Islands. The Admiralty orders a flotilla of destroyers under Captain Philip Vian of the Cossack to intercept the German oil tanker as quickly as possible. The sea war is total. Churchill has decided to rearm the whole merchant fleet, while the German submarines receive the order to attack any ship, regardless of its nationality. U-26, commanded by Heinz Scheringer, sinks the British merchant ship Langleyford, while Herbert Schulze's U-48 sinks the Sultan Star, and U-57, captained by Klaus Korth, sinks the Greta Field. Harold Gross's U-53 sends the cargo ship Martin Goldschmidt to the bottom of the ocean. Thursday, February 15th. 2 Norwegian gunboats inform the British destroyers hunting the Altmark that they have checked the ship and it is unarmed and has no cargo. The Admiralty, with Churchill's authorization, maintains the order to board and inspect the German ship. Red Army troops take the Finnish city of Suma. Marshal Mannerheim tries to hold the positions on the intermediate defense line, but is aware that the situation of his men is desperate, and many units have suffered more than 80% casualties. Faced by this situation, the Finnish government asks the Soviets for an armistice. In Berlin, Hitler continues to receive protests from some Wehrmacht generals about the actions of SS groups in Poland, which in fact the Nazi leader himself secretly authorized. Immersed in the plans of the invasion of the West, he names Erwin Rommel, one of his favorite officers, commander of the 7th Panzer Division in Godesberg, despite his lack of experience as a tank commander. There is no let-up in the actions of the German submarines, and U-14, commanded by Herbert Wolfarth, sinks the Danish merchant ship Sleipner, while Werner Hartmann's U-37 sinks the Aase, and U-50, captained by Max Hermann Bauer, the Maryland. At the same time, Heinz Scheringer's U-26 sends the Norwegian cargo ship Steinstad to the bottom of the ocean, and U-48, commanded by Herbert Schulze, sinks the Dutch ship Den Haag. Friday, February 16th. Stalin does not respond to the Finnish request for an armistice. Soviet forces have taken all the enemy positions on the Mannerheim Line and are preparing their assault on the Finns' second line of defense. Russian planes continuously bomb the rear of Marshal Mannerheim's forces, who are unable to launch a counter-offensive. The Russian leader meets with the Army General Staff to analyze the dangers in the east, but the German journalist Richard Sorge, a Soviet agent in Tokyo, is sending reports to Moscow about the massive increase in the manufacture of arms in Japan. In Norwegian waters, the German oil tanker Altmark, closely watched by British destroyers, takes refuge in the Josing Fjord to the south of Egersund, a gulf 2 kilometers long between cliffs. Churchill orders Captain Philip Vian, in charge of the operation, to board the Altmark without delay. The destroyer Cossack, violating Norwegian neutrality, enters the fjord in spite of opposition from the captain of the Norwegian gunboat Kjell. A British boarding party fights its way aboard the German oil tanker before it can get away via the Skagerrak Strait to the Baltic. 299 British sailors are freed. Upon receiving the news, Hitler considers the incident a breach of Norwegian neutrality. He now has the excuse he wants to invade the country. Saturday, February 17th. In the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, Hitler meets with General Erich von Manstein, Walter von Braustich, the Commander-in-Chief of the OKH, Army High Command, and Franz Halder, the head of the General Staff of the Army High Command, who was initially unenthusiastic about Manstein's Ardennes Plan, but is now a strong supporter. The Nazi leader is delighted with the Manstein strategy, to such an extent that he makes it his and takes the decision to execute it in the invasion of the West. In the face of Finnish withdrawal, General Timoshenko decides to reorganize his divisions to launch a final offensive to gain victory. In the United States, President Roosevelt, worried about the situation in Europe, sends Secretary of State Sumner Welles to talk with Western leaders and report back on the real situation. In London, the British government continues its campaign of evacuating children. More than 500,000 children are to be evacuated from large cities that could be targeted by German bombers to safer areas. Dönitz, the head of the U-Bootswaffe, informs Hitler that Operation Hartmut, the preparations to provide submarine cover for the invasion of Norway and Denmark, is ready. However, he tells the Nazi leader it will mean a decrease in the number of operations against the Atlantic convoys because of the shortage of units. Sunday, February 18th. Hitler writes Directive Number 10, detailing Case Yellow, Fall Gelb, the invasion of Western Europe. The key to success depends on the French not defending the Ardennes and the supposed weakness of their army. In Finland, Marshal Mannerheim's troops withdraw to Viborg in the face of Soviet pressure. At a meeting of the Allied War Council, Winston Churchill, the First Lord of the Admiralty, is given the go-ahead to draw up the plans for Operation Wilfred, the mining of Norwegian waters. In the Sea War, Admiral Erich Raeder, the head of the Kriegsmarine, orders the start of Operation Nordmark. The cruisers Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, and Admiral Hipper, together with the number of destroyers and a flotilla of submarines, patrol Scandinavian waters in order to attack Allied traffic. U-23, commanded by Otto Kretschmer, sinks the British destroyer Darren, captained by Alan Cooper, in Pentland Firth in the north of Scotland. The British ship was on escort duty with the convoy HN-12 en route from Bergen to Methel. Of the 157 crew, only 5 survive. 12 merchant ships are sunk by Joachim Preuss's U-10, Werner Hartmann's U-37, Harold Gross's U-53, and Jürgen Osten's U-61, which take part in the Wolf Pack attack.